Hello and welcome to Butterfield's series of Trust podcasts comprising of leading specialists, academics and advisors who shared their insights on some of the key topics and emerging trends impacting our clients today. In today's podcast, we focus on how to choose a trusted advisor, with thanks to our moderator, Jim Parker, Butterfield's Head of Trust in Switzerland, and our guests, Basil Zirinis of Sullivan Cromwell, Clare Maurice of Maurice Turnor Gardner, Tennant OBE of Acorn Capital Advisors, Daniel Bär of Bär Karrer, and Shân Warnock-Smith QC of Five Stone Buildings. Jim, over to you.
Well, hello and welcome everyone. For those of you who haven't met me yet, my name is Jim Parker and I'm the country head for Butterfield here in Geneva in Switzerland. Today we'll be focusing on how to choose advisors, and in particular, we're going to look at advice for clients who are looking to find long-term trusted advisors. So without further ado, maybe we kick off with this first question is, what should clients consider when choosing a new advisor? How do they find a trusted advisor? And I think, Daniel, maybe we'll kick off with you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, Jim. We had a good discussion preparing this session about all those questions. I think to start at the very beginning, the first thing which was mentioned is, and really think about what do you exactly need? What kind of an advisor do you want to have? And reflect to yourself, what is really your need for the advisor? I make an example, and the example really happened this morning. I had a client coming in who was looking for a trusted tax advisor. He wants to work together for the next years to outline a roadmap. We had a good discussion for 2 hours, but at the end of the day, we found out he needed actually someone who is coordinating his divorce lawyer and the guy doing his IPO together with the taxes. So he was really looking kind of for a coordinator to coordinate all his advice. And the main function this advisor has is to have a good international network with different lawyers. So I think first step is really going back, think what do you really need, what kind of a advisor you need and in which market, and then reflect yourself.
So building on that, Danny, I think that one of the interesting things that clients need to ask themselves is, do they actually want an advisor to endorse what they're doing or to challenge what they're doing? Because often actually people confuse the two when it's a trusted long-term advisor. And I think one of the things that is really key in the journey to find the right person, once you've defined what you want them to do, is to think about that individual both as a professional and as a personal, an individual that you want to be with. And so checking out the professional skills, I think, is easier than whether somebody's going to connect emotionally and is truly authentic. And I think the key there for success is really, really good referencing people who worked with them, referencing with clients, and really understanding how well that individual deals with conflict, their ego, and their listening skills.
I think that when we discussed this yesterday, I came out with rather soft comments like you need to check people out by word of mouth. And your example, Danny, that you've just discussed, if you like, endorsed my view. It's really important to take advice from people whose judgment you trust. Have they worked with this person? How have they found them to operate in the environment? As Danny said, what do you really want them to do? And as Sally also observed, is this somebody who's going to give you professional advice or to act as a sounding board? But it's vital that from whomever you seek advice shares the same sort of values and identifies what's important and that you're aligned with that. But fundamentally, you've got to, I think it's hard to select a trusted advisor, because I would suggest that that's a title you need to earn as an advisor. And that only evolves over years in some cases as people work with each other and get to know each other. But I would always, both for myself and for clients, look to my network to see who others are using and whom they would want to work with.
Claire, you mentioned the word chemistry yesterday. I don't know if you want to, because I think that's an important word.
For me, it's a very important thing that you've got to be able to it's got to work at that level. Do I really want to spend time in a room with this person? Sally was saying, it's a relationship, and most of us, if we are offering ourselves up as advisors, I would suggest looking for long-term relationships. It's not just it's not so much of a transactional world as in other parts of the law. But yeah, I think the chemistry is really important. It doesn't work otherwise.
And you also mentioned shared values. Is that always the case with the clients?
Well, I think that you need to have an understanding. If you don't share them, at least you respect them. Where are we all headed? And what's important? Do you believe? I may not necessarily believe in inherited wealth, but I can understand that others do. I'd love to inherit wealth, but you've got to at least respect what others' views are.
Yes, I was listening to everybody and thinking about all of the factors you've all noted, all of which are vital, and then take it and escalate it for so many of our clients who need multiple trusted advisors. They don't need just one leader and then the rest sort of consultants. They because so many of our clients, I mean, all of us in this conversation, have multiple jurisdictions to concern themselves with. I mean, most of what we all do is all cross border, and so those clients face an even greater challenge in building a team of trusted advisors long term. It's hard enough to find one that you feel right with, but you've got to build a team. And so, I think what I've said to clients is when they need a team, you've got to make sure that the trusted advisor in each jurisdiction knows how to work well with others. I know that sounds obvious, but all of us, everyone having this conversation, have been in situations where we've had co-advisors who are brilliant, and we respect each other and trust each other and produce great results for the client. And I think on occasion we've been with people who may be brilliant, but really aren't that good at working together. And then you have this breakdown of trust, and you've got people who are being territorial, which is a disaster for the client. I mean, Claire has brought me in on some fascinating major matters, and I brought her in on some. And in every case, we've both become the trusted advisor to the client, and we've brought in lawyers and advisors from around the world, and then they do. So the clients end up with 5, really trusted advisors. You have to, and the client, I've said to clients that they should watch whether the advisors are loyal to each other in little things, like in meetings. Does Claire give credit if I've had a good idea? Well, I rarely have one, but sometimes she'll pretend a good idea is mine, even if it's hers. And I'm not exaggerating. And we do that for each other, and we do that with other people on the team. And it gives clients a much better pool of advice but I've said to some of them they should watch for that. And if they don't see that, they might not have the right team. So that's my group think.
I entirely endorse that, Basil. I've been part of a litigation team, in fact, which was as dysfunctional as you could possibly imagine, largely because it was led by the so-called trusted advisor of the client, who brought in practically everybody he ever met. He'd meet somebody over coffee and have a chat with them about the case. And next thing you knew, that person was on the team, and you were having to sit around the table with all sorts of people who came in with fresh ideas, most of them bad. And the team became inordinately dysfunctional as a result. So the ability to work together and the ability to be rational and measured about the sort of people that you bring on board for a project, whether it's litigation or something else, is invaluable. But from my point of view, really the difficulties or the position is different depending on what sort of role you anticipate for the proposed advisor. If what you've got on your hands is a project, let's say a piece of litigation, multinational piece of litigation, then you're obviously going to need a variety of advisors, as Basil has said. But the word, the expression trusted advisor to me connotes something rather special, not just a team leader or a member of a team, however trusted they may be, but somebody much more like, for example, a protector, somebody you are appointing or is being appointed or put forward for a role which is likely to be a very long-term role and is genuinely going to be something that is multifaceted, possibly in some unpredictable ways. You never quite know as a protector, taking that example, quite what you're going to be faced with, what sort of issues the beneficiaries are going to have, what sort of issues the trustees are going to have, to what extent you're going to be involved in the structure. And the choice of somebody for that sort of role, that sort of rather special role, is probably different from that of recruiting simply professional advisors for a project. You'll pretty soon get to know whether your advisors are good and doing the job or not. Whereas with a protector or somebody with a much more amorphous kind of role, you don't necessarily know that until you've established a relationship over a very long time.
I think that's a really interesting point. If I think about the trusted advisor from an investment perspective, I think the fact that somebody has an expertise in one particular area of investment doesn't necessarily mean that they have the objectivity and the skill set to look overall at the investment landscape for a client. And I think one of the most important points that I would advise people is to make sure that that trusted advisor from an investment point of view has no conflicts of interest, doesn't work for an organization who's going to benefit from being appointed to manage some money.
Let me add one more thing. Speaking of giving credit for good ideas, yesterday, Sally, you made a very important point about silos, that advisors shouldn't operate in silos, and I don't know if you want to emphasize that.
Yes, I mean, I think that your point about the fact that you've got to play well together in the sandpit and actually understand the role of those different advisors. And I have to say that the central coordinator and a good family structure ensures that there's really, really good communication. Because most of the time, people aren't necessarily trying to work in a silo. It's just they've not been given the whole picture. And actually that is one of the challenges, because people are careful about information. They don't want to break confidentialities, but actually it has to be a trusted environment where you can share it so that you're not in a silo.
One of the points that we haven't talked about is the confidence to admit what you don't know, and introductions to other advisors at the right time. I think that comes back to what Sally was talking about, the specialized skill sets and sticking to your knitting and not being unwilling to allow other advisors to join in. And overall, it's this general building of reliability. And I think another area that we haven't covered is availability.
And yes, I think at the end of the day, being available as a trusted advisor, you become part of the family. You should be available as every other family member is. And
oh dear, Daniel, that sounds dangerous to me.
You don't have a dog?
Shouldn't you be setting some boundaries?
Right. I think we're not talking. Yeah, go ahead.
The idea of being totally available at any time and probably not being able to charge for it is sounds horrendous to me.
Well, it depends a little bit of whether you're being charged on a retainer as a trusted advisor or by the hour. But I do think that setting boundaries is actually really important. Otherwise, you feel totally owned by the family, and you may worry about your independence a bit. So actually having a tiny bit of distance is pretty important, as is the necessity to be able, in the right, loving, caring way, to say no.
Yes.
Which is one of the reasons why you are a trusted advisor, is that you are able to challenge really constructively.
But I do think it takes time to build these relationships, and it also it's important that everybody that you get to know people and their strengths and weaknesses, and vice versa. And it did take me some time to realize that maybe not everybody liked me and not everybody wanted to work with me. A bit of a blow, but it is very personal, and that you do need to earn that trust. And I'm not sure that I don't think there is a quick route to that, other than if you're in a crisis where you manage to dig the client or the family out of a major hole and you can be garlanded with laurel leaves because you've been such a hero. But the only person who enjoys that sort of life, well, maybe Basil and Shân enjoy that sort of approach to life. For me, that's my nightmare, is to find myself in those sorts of circumstances. But I do think it's a long game, and we should we shouldn't be expecting that we're going to be the top of their telephone contact list immediately.
I think if we had more time another day, we could talk about the different generations that advisors need to deal with, and the different values that you encounter during those transitions. I've found very interesting, because I've been in the business longer than I would care to admit as well. But I find it sometimes dealing with the G2 and G3 generation is fundamentally different than with the first generation, who hired me or the advisors in the first place. But moving on now to it's a little bit of a sticky wicket, really. How should clients go about removing existing trusted advisors who no longer serve their purpose? Maybe we could start by just talking about circumstances. Maybe some of you have some practical examples of when that's happened.
So where I've seen it work well, Jim, is when people have contracts similar to non-exec directors with terms of reference and a period for re-election. And so it depersonalizes it if somebody needs to step down, because it's about the role and not about them. And where I've seen it really work is with families who've continued to have that trusted advisor outside of the normal governance structure, so that the individual who's been close to a family and one generation and is looked up to by the next generation doesn't disappear altogether, but maybe on a little subcommittee or in the foundation. So it's sort of eased out. But I think the best way is really to have a governance structure similar to non-exec directors.
In the non-contentious setting, in a client who wants a new lawyer or new financial advisor, obviously, as we all know, you have to worry so much about the transition, and you can't just switch. You can't just say, Basil, I want you to replace so-and-so and take over, in these complex cross-border matters. And so what I've seen clients do, or when I've been asked by a new client, how can we bring you on, is to suggest that they say to their advisor, you're wonderful and you've done fantastic work for 30 years. And we want to continue with you, but we think we need a fresh perspective and a health check. So I'm willing to pay for 2 sets of lawyers. I'm willing to pay you, my longtime trusted advisor, to stay on board, but I want to bring in, Basil or Clare or Shân or to whomever, to review everything. I want you to totally open the books. It's a big expenditure, and walk everybody through everything. And I want a fresh perspective. And I've done that a couple of times where we ended up succeeding the outgoing advisor. But I've also said to clients a couple of times, you're in really good hands. You don't need to change If you want to change, I'd love to be your lawyer, but you're in really good hands and everything here is great. And, they've kept their advisor, or they've brought me in to be a co-advisor. And then the advisor I'm supposed to replace doesn't put a contract out on me, and everybody's happy.
I think you need to learn when to leave the stage too. Again, it's a sort of part of your EQ, really. And also hope that there'll be others around you who will say that this is unattractive to continue. And it's not good for anybody's reputation. People talk, so better to retire gracefully and turn your attention to those who appreciate you more. And I think it's one of a great skill to know when it's time to withdraw and hand on.
We thank you, everyone, for those views. And otherwise, we can really maybe go around the room in closing, and all of you want to contribute your top tips for selecting an advisor.
Certainly, when interviewing an independent, trusted advisor to a family overall, not a specialist on the legal side, and you really need somebody who is prepared to say no, the best way of finding out when you interview them is to actually ask them outright, what do you think I should be doing differently or better? And if they're actually prepared to give a view, it's a big tick in my book.
I'll jump in very briefly in the cross-border context where we all live. One word: culture. I would say to the client, make sure that the advisors you're thinking about really have an appreciation of culture, not just opera, but I mean national cultures, business cultures, and have the ability to make sure they really understand what is the perspective of each of the several jurisdictions. Not, again, back to Sally's term, not to be siloed, either legally or culturally.
I think I would say take your time. It's unless it's a drama, you should have the luxury of getting to know people and taking advice from people whose judgment you trust, as I said earlier.
Claire, I think you looked on my notes. Take your time was on it.
I knew we were aligned, Danny. I knew we were aligned.
Well, I think I've said it already, but I'd say make sure you can get rid of them.
I'd like to thank all of you on behalf of Butterfield for what I think has been a fascinating chat, and we can close the session now.
Thanks, Jim. On behalf of Butterfield, I'd like to thank our guests once again for taking part in our podcast today. We look forward to welcoming you to our next podcast very, very soon. Thank you.